This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for December the 4th through the 10th. On this week's show, we find out what happens when bad organizing, a biker gang, and beer mix together, and we lose 4 music legends under completely different circumstances. When it comes to running music festivals, organization is key. Actually, it's essential. Ask the tech guys who tried to do the Fire Festival on a barren island with no infrastructure just how important organizing an event months in advance actually is. Of course, turns out that event was an alleged scam and its lack of organization exposed the supposed fault lines, but I digress. Back in 1969, Woodstock took 400,000 people and treated them to a peaceful celebration with great music. At least that's according to your grandparents. That myth about it being peaceful wasn't quite true. So many people without tickets crashed the venue that organizers decided to make the mud-drenched festival free. So, not great organizing, but at least they attempted to organize it in advance. Soon, everybody wanted to have their version of Woodstock. Enter the Rolling Stones, who wanted to put on a free concert of their own with Santana, Jefferson Airplane, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, the Grateful Dead, with the Stones being the headlining act. Unlike Woodstock, this event was spur of the moment with very bad organization. In fact, they didn't even have a venue until 2 days before the concert. They ended up at Altamont Speedway near San Francisco, California. Because of the last-minute venue change, there weren't enough things like porta potties and medical facilities. They also didn't have enough security, so they got about 100 members of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang to help out with security. This is a lot like getting those white nationalists with the tiki torches in Charlottesville to do security for the BET Hip Hop Awards. It's just not a good idea. There has been some disputing the story as to why the Hells Angels were actually there, as some accounts have said that the biker gang were only there to protect the generators on the property, not to do actual security for the entire event. In any event, the payment to the gang was $500 worth of beer. Yep, $500 worth of beer. That was it. So, alcohol plus an infamously violent biker gang. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, really. Well, the concert started off okay, at least, with Santana playing, and then things went sideways fast. The Hells Angels were putting down beer like it was water, so a lot of them were pretty drunk and pretty early. The crowd wasn't doing much better as fights started breaking out between everybody. 6 months pregnant lead singer Denise Jukes of the band The Ace of Cups was hit in the head with a beer bottle and ended up with a skull fracture. During Jefferson Airplane's set, singer Marty Bolan was knocked out by a gang member during a fight. The Grateful Dead, once they heard what had happened to Marty, left Altamont. They didn't even bother playing. They just got out of there. Then things went from bad to tragic. The Rolling Stones didn't play until the evening. During the third song of their set, Sympathy for the Devil, more fighting broke out. Mick Jagger had to get the crowd to calm down, so the group stopped playing the song. After things got back to what was considered normal for the day, the set went on. During the song Under My Thumb, a fight broke out between the Angels and concertgoers when some kids in the crowd tried to run up on stage. 18-year-old Meredith Hunter was among the unruly crowd who tried to get on stage. The Hells Angels beat him up and threw him back into the crowd. Hunter's girlfriend tried to get Hunter to move away from the front, but Hunter was pretty upset at what had just happened to him, and plus, he was on way too much of something. An angry Hunter, hyped up on chemical courage, went back to the front of the crowd and pulled out a gun. Gang member Alan Passaro saw Hunter, took a knife from his belt, grabbed Hunter from the side, took care of the gun, and then let the knife take care of the rest of Hunter. In the end, Meredith Hunter was dead. While it did happen right in front of the stage, the Stones were aware of the fight, but were unaware of what eventually happened to Hunter. All Mick knew was that it looked like someone was hurt, so he stopped the concert and asked if there was a doctor around who could help out the hurt person. Then the Stones went back to performing because they realized that if they had stopped the concert at that point, there would have been a full-fledged riot. It wasn't until afterwards that they found out what really happened between Hunter and Pissarro. Hunter's death marked one of 4 that day during the concert, with the other 3 being accidental: a drowning in a nearby irrigation canal and 2 people who were killed in a hit-and-run accident. As luck would have it, what actually happened was captured on film. The Stones had a documentary crew filming them during that year's tour. The event was part of the movie Gimme Shelter. You can watch the entire day, including what happened to Hunter and Pissarro, unfold on DVD or streaming services. For the record, Pissarro was arrested and tried. However, the jury in the case of Alan Pissarro found that he acted in self-defense after watching footage of the concert, and Pissarro was acquitted of murder. After the Alameda County Sheriff's Office investigated rumors of another person being involved in the altercation, the department finally closed the case officially on May 25, 2005. The concert itself was called the unofficial end of the 1960s American counterculture movement. Rolling Stone magazine was especially harsh, as was Esquire magazine. As far as the media were concerned, Woodstock was all about peace and love, while Altamont, only 4 months later, was the end of the hippie era. As Rolling Stone magazine stated in the article title, quote, "The Rolling Stones' disaster at Altamont, let it bleed," end quote. The disastrous Altamont Music Festival held on December the 6th, 1969. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. On December the 8th, 1980, an event shook the entire world, bringing to light the dangers of celebrity, and most people found out about it by watching American football. In 1980, John Lennon had come out of a self-imposed exile after taking a few years off to help raise his new son, Sean Lennon. He was partially inspired to write new music by a couple of things. The first was by a trip on a yacht that he took from Newport, Rhode Island to Bermuda, where the yacht got into a major storm, which sickened everybody except for him. As the crew was incapacitated, John had to steer the boat for a few hours, and as he steered, he thought about life and how fragile it was. He'd find out the hard way about that later in the year. Suddenly, he had clarity about his music, and he wanted to get back to songwriting, which he did once the yacht pulled into port in Bermuda. The second thing that inspired him was hearing the B-52's debut single, Rock Lobster. He thought it reminded him of the music that his wife Yoko Ono used to do on one of her albums. So, since Rock Lobster became popular, perhaps the world was ready for music like that again. John and Yoko decided to both contribute music to his new album, which was supposed to be at least a 2-album project. The first album was called Double Fantasy, and the second one was going to be called Milk and Honey. Lots of demo songs were recorded, and then John gave the demos to his producer, Jack Douglas, with one catch. Jack had to get musicians who John had never worked with. Jack was told to not tell the studio musicians who they were recording for at all. Jack even got a couple of the guys from Cheap Trick to help do some of the recording, since Jack was producing the new Cheap Trick album at the same time. John at the time did not have a record deal, and no one knew that he was recording new music. John paid for the recording sessions himself, so then his manager shrewdly leaked the story to the media that John was back in the recording studio, even though the album was pretty much finished at that point. All of the record companies came running. On September 20th, 1980, John inked a new record label deal with a new record label called Geffen Records, beating out a more experienced and better financed record label. Actually, a lot of them. Record label head David Geffen's trick to getting John to sign on the dotted line was one of the oldest rules in selling. Always talk to the wife first. David knew that Yoko's music was a part of the new album, even though he had never listened to the demo tapes. By talking to Yoko first, he showed respect to her and her music and saw her as an equal on this album, rather than everybody else who saw John as the driving force. Just a little lesson for you kids out there. The album, Double Fantasy, came out on November 17, 1980. The first single from the album was the song Just Like Starting Over, which some people thought was John talking about being back recording or about being with a new record label. It was neither of those things. It was just a general feeling that he had, since he wrote the song in Bermuda once he got on land after that harrowing trip on the yacht. He added the words "just like" to the original title, Starting Over, because Dolly Parton had a song called Starting Over at that point in time. Just Like Starting Over was one of the last songs that he finished in the studio and was supposed to be sung in the style of Roy Orbison and Elvis Presley, although John backed off of that part while recording the song. The song was recorded at the Hit Factory in New York City on August 8th and released in America on October the 27th. At first, both the album and the single did okay, but wasn't out-of-the-box spectacular. It wasn't the critics' favorite album when it came out either. The album debuted high and then dropped. In England, the single hit the top 10 pretty quickly in England and then dropped as well. In America, on December the 8th, the single was sitting at number 6 and was still climbing up the charts. And then fate, or rather, the ugly side of man, intervened. December the 8th, 1980 started out like a normal day for John and Yoko. They had a photo shoot with famed photographer Annie Leibovitz, and then they went to the Record Plant recording studio in New York City to work on songs for Milk and Honey. As they were getting into their limo, John signed autographs for some fans waiting outside his apartment at the Dakota Building on Central Park West. For one of those fans, he signed a copy of the Double Fantasy vinyl. At 10:50 p.m., both he and Yoko came back to the apartment from their recording session. Outside the Dakota waited the fan who John had hours earlier signed a copy of his album for. As John walked up to the Dakota, that man, Mark David Chapman, pulled out a gun and shot John, and then sat down and started reading a copy of the book The Catcher in the Rye while he waited for the police to show up. John passed away a short time later. The case was a huge reminder about the dangers of celebrity, a case that would be replayed on numerous occasions ever since. More on that in a couple of minutes, because December 8th comes up again with somebody else. Because of the late hour that it happened, some people, like myself, didn't find out about it until the next morning while watching the morning news or reading the newspaper. However, if you were up late that night, then you found out about it two different ways. The first was if you were listening to your local radio station and the DJ announced it to you. The second was if you were watching American television and watching football at the time. In 1980, Monday Night Football was a cultural phenomenon. It was one of the most popular TV shows of the week. It was on ABC television, as a matter of fact. That night, the Miami Dolphins were playing the then annual doormat of their division, my team, the New England Patriots. It was broadcaster Howard Cosell who interrupted the game to make the announcement. You can actually catch that on YouTube. Somebody has put it up there from the actual broadcast. Remember, there was no nationwide cable at the time, no CNN, no notifications popping up on your smartphone, and hell, no cell phones at all of any sort, no internet, no personal computers. In that era, the only way you were finding out about anything was word of mouth, television, newspapers, and radio. Those were all kings. And as far as television went, there was basically ABC, CBS, NBC, maybe your PBS station. There might be an indie station for the bigger cities. That was it. Worldwide shock at the time was pretty immediate, though. On MTV's list of most shocking events in music history, John Lennon's death ranks as the most shocking. Many tributes were made to John, including near where he was killed. A small part of Central Park across the street from the Dakota was later renamed Strawberry Fields in honor of Lennon, who used to love going over there to take walks. Ironically, 24 years to the day later, on December 8th, 2004, history would repeat itself, sort of, as another tragic death of a musician at the hands of a fan occurred. Guitarist Dimebag Darrell Abbott, who became famous in the band Pantera but was in his own band at the time called Damage Plan on that night, was playing a Damage Plan gig at the Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio. During the band's first song, a deranged fan, Nathan Gale, rushed the stage and shot and killed Dimebag Darrell. Then he shot the band's head of security, Jeffrey Mayhem Thompson, a club employee, Aaron Hulk, and a fan of the band, Nathan Bray, and also wounded 3 other people before finally being killed by a Columbus police officer. Dimebag Darrell was 38 years old at the time. The death of John Lennon on December the 8th, 1980, and the death of Dimebag Darrell Abbott of Pantera 24 years later on December the 8th, 2004. This next story is about a man who also passed away way too soon, who was just starting to achieve crossover stardom until an accident unfortunately took his life. Otis Redding was born on September the 9th, 1941. He has been called one of the greatest singers of popular music ever. He was a member of Little Richard's backup band, the Upsetters, for a time, and also Johnny Jenkins's band, the Pine Toppers. He started recording as a solo artist back in 1962 with Stax Records. His first single was the now classic These Arms of Mine back in '62. In 1964, he put out his debut album, Pain in My Heart. What followed was an incredible amount of album and touring production. In fact, as far as touring went, he toured the South and Europe pretty continuously for the better part of the decade, all the while recording song after song. In 1964 and 1965, Otis put out 3 albums. The aforementioned These Arms of Mine was in 1964. In March of 1965, he put out his second album, The Great Otis Redding Sings Soul Ballads. That album had Otis's first huge hit, Mr. Pitiful. While on tour to support this album, Otis started working on songs that would become part of his next album. He decided that most of the songs would be cover versions of soul songs. 3 of the original songs were co-written by him: I've Been Loving You Too Long, Respect, and Old Man Trouble. Respect would be slowed down and covered by Aretha Franklin later for her classic version of the song. The entire album was recorded in 3 days. The recordings started on April 19th and then finished on July 9th and 10th. He was backed up by the members of the Memphis Horns, the Bar Keys, and Booker T and the MGs. The album was released on September 15, 1965, and although the album only made it to number 75 on Billboard's albums chart, 3 of the singles became top 40 hits: I've Been Loving You Too Long, Respect, and Shake. The album is considered to be one of the greatest albums of all time, even though most of it is cover songs. After that album, Otis blew. Otis's career started going better and better. By 1967, Otis was hitting his stride. After years of being the workhorse at Stax Records, he was finally getting his due. His gravelly vocals plus his sex appeal and energetic performances were winning over audiences worldwide. He started off by breaking through at the Monterey Rock Festival only 6 months earlier, the same festival, by the way, that saw The Who and Jimi Hendrix rise to prominence in America. Aretha Franklin at that point had made a hit out of his song Respect. Redding was getting some respect of his own finally with songs like I've Been Loving You Too Long and Try Little Tenderness. On December 7th, 1967, Redding left a Memphis recording studio, having worked on what would end up being his biggest hit. He needed to get to Cleveland for a TV performance on a show called Upbeat, and then 3 concerts in 2 nights at Leo's Casino, and then a concert in Madison, Wisconsin. Redding took a private plane, a Beechcraft H-18 that Redding himself had bought. On the plane were members of the group the Bar Keys: guitarist Jimmy King, saxophonist Phelan Jones, organist Ronnie Caldwell, and drummer Carl Cunningham, along with trumpet player Ben S. Cawley Jr., the group's valet Matthew Kelly, and the pilot Richard Frazier. One other member of the Bar Keys, James Alexander, was not on the plane. Because there wasn't any room for him on the plane, Alexander had been taking commercial flights and took one from Cleveland to Wisconsin. That decision ended up saving his life that day. The group did their television performance and their 3 concerts at Leo's Casino. Otis then called his wife and kids on the 9th. That was the last time that his family would hear Otis's voice while he was alive. The weather on December the 10th was pretty bad. There was heavy rain along with fog, and they were warned not to fly. According to an interview, James Brown said that he had a conversation with Redding before he left to go to Cleveland to warn him that the plane was too small to have that many people and also that much band equipment on it. Kind of like Aliyah in the Bahamas, you might say. Brown also said that the plane had a lot of service issues and was an old plane with an old battery. However, concert performances are important, and since the one at the Factory nightclub near the University of Wisconsin wasn't too far as the crow flies, Frazier felt that he could make the flight. So the decision to fly was made. A little after 3 p.m., about 4 miles out from the runway at Trove Field Airport in Madison, Wisconsin, pilot Richard Frazier radioed in that he wanted permission to land the plane. As the plane approached the runway in Madison, something happened, and the plane crashed into a small lake, killing Otis and all but one person on the plane. That one person, Ben S. Cawley Jr., remembered being asleep and then waking up just before the plane crashed, feeling that the plane was spinning. He remembered Phelan Jones saying, "Oh no," while looking out the window. He remembered undoing his seatbelt for some reason, and the next thing he knew, he was in the waters of Lake Monona, grasping onto a seat cushion to stay alive. Since Cawley wasn't a swimmer, he couldn't save anybody else. He thought that he had heard someone screaming for help, but by the time he got to where the screaming was, the person had drowned. Otis's body was found the next day on the 11th. James Alexander identified the body on the 12th. According to Alexander, Redding was still strapped to his seat when divers found his body. Otis Redding was 26 years old at the time. The cause of the plane crash was not determined. However, a biography that was published about Otis back in 2001 claimed an awful lot of things, including drug use and affairs. Otis's widow filed a lawsuit against the author, accusing the author of lying. In this biography, the author also claimed that Otis's manager conspired with the mafia to cause the plane crash in order to collect on a $1 million life insurance policy. To date, none of the author's claims, best of my knowledge at least, has ever been proven. Pretty outlandish stuff, honestly. But that's what biographers will do sometimes. Back to Redding's final song, though. As it turns out, the song that Redding was working on at the time of his death was Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. At the end of that last recording session, Redding couldn't complete the lyrics to the end of the song, so he whistled them instead, always intending to get back to the song to put the lyrics in. He never got the chance. The single, including its now famous whistling part, was released and became not only the biggest hit of Otis's career, but also the first posthumous single to ever hit #1 on the Billboard Singles Chart. Otis Redding was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989. The late great soul singer Otis Redding passed away in a plane crash along with most of the members of the band the Bar-Kays at the age of 26 on December the 10th, 1967. And what a tragic loss it was. One of my all-time favorite singers. Next, the Caruso of rock, the Big O, the man with the trademark sunglasses and all-black everything outfit. In an era where every rock and roll singer was trying to show how much of a man he was, Roy Orbison was not afraid to ever show his vulnerable side with his silky smooth voice by doing his ballads. Roy Orbison was born in Texas in 1936. When he was 6 years old, he was given a guitar. Roy started playing in a band called the Wink Westerners, who played country songs and also had their own local radio show. When he finished high school, he went to North Texas State College. Roy's idea was to study geology so that he could work in the oil fields if music didn't work out for him. However, once he heard that fellow North Texas State College student Pat Boone had gotten a record contract, well, Roy resolved to do the exact same thing. Roy ended up transferring to Odessa Junior College. While there, he and what remained of the Wink Westerners played dances on the weekends and had a local TV show. One day, Johnny Cash stopped by to perform on the TV show, and Johnny suggested that the group audition for Sam Phillips at Sun Records. And when they did, Sam turned them down flat. Around this time, though, Roy and his band got a better TV gig with a bigger station. They changed the name of the band to the Teen Kings, and since Sun Records didn't take them, the group decided to record a song that Roy had written a few years earlier while at North Texas State College called Ooby Dooby. Once they released the song on Jewel Records, the song did pretty well. It also got noticed by Sam Phillips, who only months earlier had turned the group down for a recording contract. This time around, Sam went chasing and he said yes. The Teen Kings re-recorded Ooby Dooby for Sun Records, and the song went to number 59 on the Billboard Singles Chart. The group ended up splitting up, but Roy decided to stay at Sun. After becoming angry with the way his career was going at Sun, Roy went on tour with Patsy Cline and then quit performing to concentrate on songwriting at songwriting firm Acuff Rose. Rose eventually brought him to the attention of Monument Records after he had written and recorded a couple of songs with his writing partner, Joe Melson. Monument Records was where Roy would become a big star. Between 1960 to 1964, Roy put out classic songs like Only the Lonely, Crying, Dream Baby, Blue Bayou, Pretty Woman, In Dreams, and many more. The song Crying was written by Roy and Joe Melson back in 1961. The song is one of Roy's signature operatic ballads. It was released in July 1961 and went to number 2 only 3 months later on the charts. Don McLean did a cover version back in 1980 that went to number 6 on the country music chart and ended up being his second biggest hit of his career behind the iconic song American Pie. As for Roy, he did a duet version of the song with Katie Lang that did pretty well on the charts and won him a Grammy Award, along with Katie Lang. Roy seemed to disappear for a number of years, and then things changed. Roy was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. He did a well-received all-star tribute for his music called A Black and White Night, which you can still watch on one of the streaming services. In October 1988, Roy became a member of the supergroup The Traveling Wilburys, along with Tom Petty, George Harrison, Bob Dylan, and Jeff Lynne of the group ELO, or Electric Light Orchestra, if you will, and put out an album. The world took an interest in Roy again, finally. Roy put out a new album in November 1988 called Mystery Girl with the hit song You Got It. Late in 1988, despite having chest pains, Roy started a hectic schedule with touring, enjoying his career resurgence. On December 4th, 1988, Roy played what turned out to be his final concert in Highland Heights, Ohio. 2 days later, on December the 6th, Roy passed away of a heart attack. Roy Orbison was 52 years old at the time. Roy Orbison's final concert in Highland Heights, Ohio on December the 4th, 1988. The death of Roy Orbison from a heart attack on December the 6th, 1988. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for December the 4th through the 10th. Thank you very, very much for listening and or watching if you are on YouTube or Spotify.